right, everyone. Welcome back to the Anti-Media. And wow, we are in some crazy times right now. And I think everyone knows what's going on with the gun issue. I'm sure everyone has seen it in their Facebook news feed over and over again. Everyone they know has an opinion on this. I may be the only neutral person in the world on this issue. But there are so many issues going on right now. I mean, we may look back and see this period of time as kind of a, an intersection, a nexus. I don't know what to call it, but we're definitely at kind of a turning point here where things could really turn to shit here pretty quickly. So normally we talk about conspiracies on this show. Fortunately, reality has become so insane that all we have to do is just talk about the regular news cycle and we talk about conspiracies. So we're going to get into that here.
I'm doing fine, man. I don't know. I don't think that where we're at here subscribes as much to the paranoia that's coming on the coasts from the weird media onslaught. So all I can say is I'm seeing people getting really paranoid back home, and it's not affecting much here. So
yeah, I mean, it's not just the gun control issue I'm talking about. There's First Amendment issues. There's just generally, I guess what I'm talking about is a general feeling that there is a very, very polarized us versus them ideology going on among both sides of the political spectrum. People are radicalized. People that...
Well, me and Nick, we all went into it last night where it was like, could you imagine what would happen if the second went? The first would go too, and can you imagine with this regime in right now what would happen? I mean,
well, it'd be insane, and that's what we're going to have Claire Bernish, journalist, on the show here in a minute, and so we're going to get into that aspect of it because I think there's a lot of stuff going on that that a lot of people maybe don't even know about it with regards to censorship. So we're going to get into that here in a minute. And actually, Claire, are you in the call? I see her here. All right. Well, she'll be joining us momentarily. But so okay. So you think that this general issue, you think this is largely media hype, DB?
Well, I mean, the funniest thing about it is that if people still think there's like two sides going, like fighting it out right now, like you can be assured that the same people control both sides, which is the banking and the banking side and the military side are just kind of duking it out right now. And the same, core families of people that have all the wealth control both sides through, means that aren't even that private. Like they just own these companies. They own, Raytheon. They own Northrop Grumman. They own CNN. They own Disney. You know what I mean? You can trace back who owns all the stocks of these things. That's who controls, at least in the West. That's how control is fomented and passed down generation to generation through these stocks, companies, and everything like that. So it's not a conspiracy. It's just there's always been a fight between the men with the money and the men with the guns, because the men with the money pay men with guns, and then the men with the guns say, why am I accepting money? Why don't I just shoot the guys with money and take their money? That always happens every time in every country, and coups always happen around those two facets. But at the end of the day, the people in true control don't care who wins and will always lose. That's what people need to understand.
Absolutely.
So when you say it's us versus them, you're very right. The only reason that the United States has free speech is because we're armed. If we disarm, we will lose free speech. Look at the UK. If you criticize someone in the UK, you'll go to prison. Yet, if you do something atrocious like, I don't know, knife someone, you can get out in 2 years. So we do not want UK or Australian or New Zealand society to come here. But do we need to refine American society? Absolutely. We've been needing to destroy our empire for a long time.
Well, yeah, and I think at the core of this, not that there's a single problem. I mean, ultimately, this is an extremely diverse problem. This overall conflict is very complex. It's not just one issue. But I do think if we were to distill it down to a core issue, I would have to say that, corrupt government is behind a lot of it because people don't trust what their government is doing. And that causes all kinds of problems because it creates this general conspiratorial atmosphere that causes people to turn on each other. What's interesting is the left is, as much as the left right now hates the president, the left is very much pro-government, pro-mainstream media. They want the status quo deep state in control, whereas the right, who I typically disagree with on almost every issue, but the right is actually the one championing, even though they have their president in office, they're the ones championing this idea that there is a deep state conspiracy and that, there's kind of a larger conspiracy going on right now to maintain control in a few hands. I would love to know, what's going on. But there's so much disinformation that, just a second, I'm trying to get Claire on here, but as usual, there's technical problems.
What more can you say with these scripted performances CNN's forcing these kids to do, dude? It's beyond fucked up what NDAA 2012 did. I don't think people understand that they're legally lied to now. And there's not going to be any repercussions for these people. They're going to get golden parachutes when they retire or they're let go or they resign. And that's the fucked up part, is that there's been an uptick in mass shootings since 2012 because I don't think a lot of them are real, dude.
Yeah. Just a second. Okay. All right, we're getting into false flags now.
Way more than that. More like wag the dog in the most fucked up way there is, which is like, actually have people come in and shoot people, blame it on these damn kids, these teens that are on psychotropic drugs who are probably MK Ultra out of their minds. And I'm sorry, man. Especially Sandy Hook was already it started to be broken down now in court. Like, they can't prove the facts that they used to portray this as the event that it wasn't. And you can look up that guy. I said his name, I think months ago. Wolfgang Halbig is he went to civil court, and the town or I believe it was actually the state of Connecticut, I think they tried to sue him for libel, and they couldn't prove anything about Sandy Hook. They literally couldn't prove it in court. So this guy's now in a counter loss. I mean, he's going to win millions of dollars, and it's going to blow open this whole shit in a charade that for what it was. Now, I'm not saying kids didn't die. That's the horrible thing about it. It's just like Vegas. People died. Why wouldn't they? I mean, they just want the biggest event to push an agenda. That's always what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also the chance, Nick brought up the point last night that it's possible that this is just extreme ideological opportunism, which is that they're waiting for these events to happen and then you capitalize on them.
Well, they can create it through things that are not science fiction. I mean, we've been able to more or less mind control people for damn near 100 years. So where do you think they're at now? I mean, they're far beyond. They were dosing the American public with LSD in the 60s and admitted it in the 80s. I mean, it's 20 years behind where they'll say what they can do. I don't even know what they're doing now, man. Maybe they're doing mass mind control, and that's what the sheeple phenomenon really is.
Well, that's a big question. I'm actually in a conversation with a guy. Have you heard of the Tiffany Jenks case?
I only have heard her name, don't know much about it.
Okay, well, that's just another one of these cases where there's a guy I'm speaking to, her ex-boyfriend thinks that, she was under some kind of mind control. And there was, of course, the Aaron Alexis case, the Navy Yardsman who shot up the yard there, and he had inscribed ELF into his gun, which, of course, stands for electronic low frequency, which is, of course, the way in which some people think that the government is sending certain signals to people. And look, I think it's almost a certainty that they have the ability to do that. I'm not sure it's advanced enough to where they would be able to definitively make someone do a specific thing, but I think they can definitely push someone in the direction of doing something horrible. As far as the psychotropic drugs, I don't buy that for a second, and that this is coming from someone who's been on every single antidepressant in the world, including SSRIs, all of them. And that stuff has never, ever made me the slightest bit violent. In fact,
what about it in a combination with other things, though?
That's possible, and I'm sure there are people for whom these drugs do have terrible ramifications, but it's certainly not the norm. I mean,
especially with these kids.
I've known many people who have also taken them, and yet with teens, it's a possibility. But I mean, my doctor put me on Prozac. I'm not on it anymore. My doctor put me on Prozac when I was 18, and I was a late bloomer too, so I was still very, very adolescent at that point.
I got Prozac at 16.
There's Claire. Prozac at 16. All right. Well, you got me beat by a couple years there.
I got it right when it came out, and it ruined my life because I didn't need it at the time, and then it was a waterfall from there because all of the doctors were so excited about it, this drug, this first-time thing that could actually solve people's problems. It became a cascade, and a lot of people ended up on a lot of drugs they didn't need to be on. So.
Right, and that's a huge problem. And honestly, the pharmaceutical issue, I mean, that's such a complex issue, and I've gotten into so many arguments with people over the years. For me personally, there are certain medications that help me dramatically with depression, with bipolar, with anxiety, with all that stuff. But there's plenty of reasons to be distrustful of big pharma. I'm not sure that you could use psychotropic and SSRIs as a strategic way of causing false flags. There's just simply too many things that can go wrong. So I don't buy that theory for a single second. But now that I've got you on now, Claire, because one thing I really want to get into is the censorship issue that's going on right now. And I know this is an issue that you've been covering for a while, and I have some thoughts on what's going on, but I want to get from you the latest on what you think is going on and why the assault on the First Amendment is actually a far more legitimate threat right now than any assault on the Second Amendment.
Yes, absolutely, hands down, without question. Because when you have an inability of the press or of actually anybody else to really propose an opposing viewpoint or a dissenting opinion, when that's suppressed or quashed or kind of ridiculed in social media or whatever, then you're dealing with a position where the mainstream press is dictating what it is that you're supposed to care about. Okay, I'm sorry. This is such an emotional thing for me because I've been fighting this all my life, and I remember reading 1984 and thinking, yes, it absolutely could happen here. I just didn't think that it would happen in my lifetime. So it's an interesting...
100 times more insanely, powerful than what he actually wrote. You didn't know corporations would be involved with the government too.
Right, and all of us. I mean, this is the thing that I found out. when you start talking about banning speech or dictating speech of, pronouns or anything else, what you can say, then that is when you come into that really, really red area where it's a domino effect and you're not going to win. And we found this, and we knew this was going to happen about 2015, 2016 with the run-up to the elections. We saw that the term fake news was being used, and it was kind of anachronistic. It didn't make sense, and it was all of a sudden and abrupt. And nobody really understood where it was coming from. But in alternative media, because we had, all of us, covered the corruption of Hillary Clinton's campaign and the leaks from WikiLeaks and anything else that we could find and report on factually, we were being at some time suppressed, oddly, by Facebook algorithms and Twitter and YouTube and other platforms. And it seemed coordinated at the time, and it seemed ridiculous at the time, and it also seemed as if it were a state propaganda campaign. But there was no proof, and there still is not necessarily proof. But after the fact, we're looking now at this twin campaign with quote-unquote fake news and quote-unquote Russian propaganda, and they're inflammatory terms now. And so you can divide the populace with these terms, but neither of them hold any weight. Like, fake news was a propaganda campaign started on the idea that people cannot decide for themselves what is actually fake and what is not. But if people from even slightly earlier than the internet remember, you have the tabloid rags on the grocery supermarket shelves, and they're obviously fake. What the government is trying to do is say, hey, we're a safe place. You don't have to discern for yourselves. We can do that for you. And when they do that, that means that there is no longer any transparency in government. There's no longer any transparency in the build-up for war, as there is right now with North Korea, China, Iran, and I forget right now, but we're Russia. We're building up for all of these things, and the propaganda campaign and the quashing of the free press are probably the biggest deals for anybody to be concerned with, and yet nobody seems to care at all.
No one gives a fuck. No, most people don't know, but even people who do know don't give a fuck.
No, well, if you say something hollow like freedom of the press, it sounds, oh, yeah, whatever. And particularly after this propaganda campaign has kind of waged war on the truth, you have people saying, well, the New York Times or the Washington Post never print anything that's true. And that's abjectly false. Of course they do. And of course they do good journalism still. It's just that you have to take it with the understanding that they are also state propaganda, and they have basically the leniency to lie to you or to omit the truth at will. So you have to double check. You have to back up what it is that you're seeing. But it doesn't mean that everything they put out is false. And the misnomer of this propaganda campaign that has funding, very direct funding, and saying that you can't say the term fake news without having the root in this propaganda campaign. The term was put out there without reason. There was no sort of plague of misinformation or disinformation. Obama helped cultivate this term. We are having this disaster in information and transparency because people are falling for this term and everybody's pointing the finger and saying fake news, fake news, fake news, but nothing really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, this is a complex issue, and just to give some context here a little bit to what we're talking about. So, and DB mentioned this a little bit earlier. So in 2012, the federal government officially legalized the use of propaganda on the American people. I don't know how you can look at that and not be creeped out, but because Obama was president, a lot of people looked the other way. A lot of civil liberty activists just kind of went into Xanax mode during the Obama campaign, during the Obama presidency. Then, of course, as Claire was talking about, you get this incredible buildup of the fake news meme, which, of course, is just a standard way of controlling the narrative. The government and the elite establishment, including the media, which, of course, has been infiltrated by Operation Mockingbird type aspects for a long, long time, realized that they were losing control of the narrative. So what they did is, of course, is they drove a wedge into the alternative media, and they're doing it on a two-pronged. This is a two-pronged assault. The first is through, of course, social media of basically using the Russian propaganda thing to divide people and to say, look, there's certain news sources that can't be trusted, and they're subverting our democracy. So these are the sources you need to listen to. And, of course, these sources are the ones that are the state-controlled. And then they're also doing on the algorithmic front, and this is, of course, a big issue that's affecting all of us in the alternative media, which is that they are demonetizing content on YouTube. They are restricting the page reach of certain pages on Facebook. They're using algorithmic censorship to make sure that alternative media cannot have the influence that it was having, and which scared the shit out of the government. And, of course, that's why they're doing this now. Now, of course, the one of the newest things, and Claire, I really want to get your perspective on this. So the heads of Google, which, of course, controls YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook appeared before Congress last month and literally said that they are now trying to subvert extremism through homegrown propaganda, which is to say that people on these sites that are looking for radical or extremist content are going to be redirected toward specially made propaganda made by these sites. Have you heard about that?
I had not heard about that specifically, but I will say that does not surprise me. The propaganda campaign has kind of upped its ante, and beyond just that, go ahead.
No. I'm just trying to find some more details of that, but please go ahead.
No, we have this campaign of, I mean, if you take the different political perspectives, you can take the red and the blue together, and you can look at this from the outside, and you can say each can find some sort of patriotic false premise to be behind this propaganda campaign because, you know, we're talking about, ooh, terrorists, let's quash the terrorists. That's an easy thing for people to get behind, and that's the idea. And so we have these programs in place, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at the different premise here, and I'm thinking that part of the problem is that we came into the fake news issue by deception in the first place. There were lists, if people remember, that went out. One was published by the Post, and one was alluded to by the Post, and they made it seem as if independent media and alternative media could not possibly have a voice because they must be Russian propaganda. We have an entire campaign issued at people who might be Russian propaganda. We're looking at the switch in the Nuclear Posture Review to say that we can now use nuclear weapons aggressively, like as a first strike, instead of only in defense of a nuclear weapon against us. So we're looking at all of these things together with the propaganda. And it is not entirely unlikely, which is what the people at the, I can't remember what their name is, but the people who set the clock at 2 minutes to midnight,
right?
They're saying that it is, we are so much on the brink of things that we all need to be careful. And all we are doing is posturing and using language and semantics to argue back and forth and volley back and forth. And it's ridiculous. And the worst part about all of this is that people are following it as if it is still truth. And if people would take the time to get to know the countries that it is that the U.S. says that it's enemies against, et cetera, then this would not even be an issue. And I'm sorry to get philosophical, but this is just, in the past week or so, I keep looking at this propaganda campaign and what is meant basically to erase freedom of the press and freedom of expression. And it breaks my heart. It's terrifying. I'm looking at this in the context. I went to school in the 70s, and I look at the context of this in the 70s, and I think we never thought that we would get here, and we never thought that we would be, posturing against one another for no particular reason in deference to the humanity of the world. And we're here. And the problem is not only that, but people on social media across the world, instead of coming together and saying, this is freaking ridiculous, you're right, what they're doing is picking each other apart instead for political ideology and everything else. It makes no sense. We're coming very close to the brink, and I don't think people realize how much. If anybody has actually studied the Pentagon Papers and what Ellsberg has left out that he copied and did not leak, then they would understand how very, very, very close we are at any moment to nuclear war, and how imperative it is that we stop this vitriol against one another and realize that it isn't any of us who has the finger on the button, but it's the government. And as long as we give them permission to have that finger on the button, we're all victims of them. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get philosophical again, but this is, the more that I look into this and the more that I delve into documents, the more that I talk to whistleblowers, I talk to Kiriakou and several other people, the more that I understand what's going on, the more that I realize how blind and how dangerous it is for people to be apathetic right now. And it breaks my heart that people don't care about the fate of where they live on the planet.
Well said, and I mean, I think your emotion here is very important and powerful, and I found this aspect of this that I wanted to run by you here, which is I wrote this article called "Facebook, Google, and Twitter Announce Counter-Speech PSYOP to Keep Public Docile." So I'm just going to read a couple sentences here, because there's been some Orwellian shit going on, but this one took my breath away. So this was last month. Representatives for the three companies, Facebook, Google, and Twitter, testified before the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation to outline specific ways they're trying to combat extremism online. Facebook, Google, and Twitter aren't just tinkering with their algorithms to restrict certain kinds of violent content and messaging. Of course, they're doing that too. They're also using machine learning and artificial intelligence to manufacture what they call counter-speech. Essentially, their goal is to catch burgeoning extremists or anyone being radicalized online and re-engineer them via targeted propagandistic advertisements. Now, this is a new chapter here. I mean, you're talking about proprietary propaganda created by these companies in support of the government.
Exactly. That's the thing. It's as if the corporatocracy is driving the government in all of this, and that should terrify everybody. That actually is that's a telling statement right there. I don't think that people understand. There's a very solid imperative reason why freedom of speech, expression, press, etc. are written into the very First Amendment. It's not as if I give credence myself as an anarchist to the laws or the premise or anything, but my family in politics and journalism, I understand what these things are in the society where we are built upon rules and laws and legislation and failed politicians, if you will. And to hear that there are the brazen premise for so many laws where, I mean, it's as if we're being curbed our rights, not even subtly anymore, and nobody cares. All of the people who are on, say, Trump's side, who are screaming about, well, the Constitution, I will tell you one thing. If you are not screaming about the Constitution with freedom of the press and freedom of expression and freedom of speech and in actual honesty and not in your own definition, but as it was intended, which is a broad interpretation, then you're failing the country. And likewise on the left, for anybody who says that it should be inclusive, we should be including all these people. We must have freedom of speech because these people matter and these people matter. It does not matter unless you are enveloping everybody and you are discrediting the government, because all that is happening right now is that the government is going to take rights away under the cover of that premise. And when you say free speech matters, but you say, oh, hate speech does not. Well, in fact, it does, according to the Supreme Court. And if you say hate speech doesn't matter and it shouldn't matter and it must be taken away, then you are advocating for the state that is going to oppress you in the end. These are not impossible, like, irretractable beliefs. These are not something that people should have a hard time with. It's just that at this point, if we don't start working together, which I see no hope in, it's all fading away. I mean, the empire deserves to die. I think we can all pretty much agree on that. But as it dies, do we all have to suffer too? Or can we, like, at least come together and work together cooperatively and overcome these differences that are so arbitrary? I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. You're passionate about it, and this is an important issue. I'm glad to have you back on the show.
I'm sorry I don't have a lot more to add. You know, when you get to that point where it gets boring and tiring just to deal with bullshit, it's like, fuck it. At this point, it's going to break down anyway. It's like you need to band together with people, and if there's people you love, you got to somehow to find a way to protect them because maybe they're not aware.
Well, I
agree, but we can't, like, also just let people go. I mean, this is the thing in the activist community. Even when you have a major problem, people always say they care, and then they're not there. There was. I'm 40. I'm almost 44. In a week from today, I'll be 44. And I'll say in the 70s there was this thing where, or even the early 80s, where the whole community kind of, without question, just looked after each other. It wasn't labeled anything. And everybody just kind of got along, and they did their thing together because they were making good for each other. And we have come so far from that it chills the bones and it hurts the soul. And I'm sorry, but I really wish we could go back there sometimes.
Yeah, there does seem to be some issues with solidarity right now, and I think that if the government had a plan to fragment these different movements, they've certainly done a good job at it, because across the board, I think a lot of movements are being splintered right now, and people are turning against each other when they agree on 95% of the issues. Somehow those 5% that they disagree on are causing people to literally turn on friends. And it's just nuts. I mean, it's the whole divide and conquer thing that we always talk about, but it's still in use, and it's having a chilling effect, that's for sure. So, I mean, usually we try and talk about what we could possibly do to fight back. Unfortunately, with this algorithmic censorship, I mean, anti-media is being straight up just pilfered right now. It makes it very difficult to fight. at least using information. When the information when these corporations are literally censoring the algorithm that allows this information to get out, I mean, that's just stunning. It's just, it doesn't surprise me particularly, but it cannot be overstated how shocking it is that the gatekeepers of the internet are bonding with the government to restrict free speech.
If there are people out there who have large pages or, pages with big followings who have seen the censorship, etc., document that. Take screenshots, note the falling in, reach and everything else. Like, document that and get it to me. It's not as if there aren't people who haven't noticed this is going on. We tried perhaps 2 years ago to do something in advance when we saw this coming. Now this is very clear, and I think that it might be possible.
Yeah, Claire, we were on it. We were screaming at the mountaintop.
Yep.
Years ago about this, and everything that we predicted happened.
Sadly, yes.
It's unbelievable, man.
It hurts.
It does.
It makes me cry sometimes, honestly.
It's a financial blow to us individually, of course, but it goes so much far beyond that. It's
You're talking rights. You're talking about the basic rights of human beings to know information. And when that is taken away, there is nothing left. If you take away the access to information, there is nothing left. What can you have without freedom to access information that is plain and factual? What do you have? You don't have anything except for a totalitarian society. That's terrifying, or it should be. And the scary thing is that it's not terrifying, apparently, to a lot of people.
Well, no, and look at the villainization of whistleblowers and leakers that's coming out now. There was a time when both the left and the right mainstream criminal cabals were heralding. Of course, they only like WikiLeaks when WikiLeaks is doing something against their enemy, which, of course, shows their ethics pretty transparently there. But transparency in WikiLeaks has a spotlight. Now, say what you want against his motives. I'm not saying Julian Assange is spotless, but the reporting accuracy of WikiLeaks is flawless. And to see the propaganda campaign that's come out to villainize WikiLeaks and furthermore to villainize any of the whistleblowers or the chilling effect against whistleblowers, the chilling effect against protesters, all of this is part of a giant plan to disrupt the so-called radicalization funnel, is what they call it. And
I wrote about this, about the fake news, quote-unquote, thing. It's a very specific term for a very specific reason, as I called it when it came out. And it's not the only thing. There are several layers of propaganda campaigns going on here. The Russians is another, and I mean, you're hitting on another. It's just that people are, I think at this point, not only unaware, but unwilling to be aware. And that's sad.
The left, all they care about is Trump, Trump, Trump. Trump is evil, Trump, Trump. On the right, all they care
Trump
about
is good.
Deep state. And it's like, and this is coming from someone who was among the first movement that popularized the deep state phrase. And here Trump comes along and reappropriates it and turns it to garbage because now no one will even listen to you when you talk about the deep state because fucking Alex Jones has been talking about it nonstop.
Because they're key terms. These are psychological tactics. They're psychological tactics of propaganda, both fake news and that. I mean, like so many of these things, and people just are not willing to look.
Yeah, there's still, unfortunately, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on, and there's a lot of people that are just hardwired into their life, into their creature comforts, their pleasures. There's a biological mechanism at work here of just survival of the fittest. Do what you need to do to survive. Turn out anything else that challenges your trajectory, even if it means turning away from the truth. And I think, a lot of people I know are having families right now. And I think that plays a big part of it. Even though you would think people would want to make the world a freer, better place for the future, but unfortunately, people have very strict definitions on how they want that to go down. And the definitions vary from the left to the right, of course, and all in between, circle back around between anarchists and libertarians. Everyone has their ideal slate of buffet of freedoms that they think should be there. And, I think one day we're going to get to the point where we pick up our plate, we go up to the buffet, and there's nothing there. I mean, I don't want to sound too alarmist, too extremist, but I mean, it's if you look at what has happened since 9/11, I think if you really sit back and you look at all of what has happened in that decade and a half, almost 2 decades now, it's jaw-dropping. And it never would have been possible without
the war on terror.
The war on terror, absolutely. So
it's convenient when you wage war on both a tactic and a concept, how broad the strokes are that you can wage damage against the world.
Right.
And we have done that. This government has done that for years, and we're looking at the backlash right now, right in the face. And yet this administration is still saying, we are going to posture a nuclear first strike. And all of the facets for that to take place are in place, by the way, for both China and North Korea, and partially for Iran, based on our revision of the nuclear posture review. So it is entirely possible that this asshat might just push the button at the wrong time.
Oh, God.
So
yeah.
for everybody to keep in mind.
You're always you talk a lot about the propensity for World War III. What do you think right now about where we're at with that situation and what could happen?
I will say that the worst thing that the atomic doomsday clock forecasters predict is that it will be an accident. And from what I've seen, based on records and documents and everything else from the past, yes, it will be an accident, absolutely. And it's very close to that right now. It will be somebody pulling the trigger or sounding the alarm when they shouldn't, and we're screwed.
An accident with quotes around it, or an accident?
No, an accident, as in, like, literally 45 times during, like, the Cuban Missile Crisis,
yeah.
There were accidental false alarms. Like, that is the actual primary concern of the doomsday clock scientists.
Oh, boy.
I think we've come so close so many times, too. Like, even even this missile thing with Hawaii, I mean, I don't know if anybody's researched it, but the systems that are put in place cannot be a false alarm. So
yeah, exactly. Like, there is no, we are so close to just blowing the world up right now. And people they're more concerned with what Mueller has to say or what this, that, and the other thing, when that's such a non-issue to begin with. It's amazing.
So you guys are saying that wasn't a fault, like that they really actually, something was about to happen and then it didn't.
It was a test.
Oh.
That's my
So it was an actual test, or there was an actual threat?
I believe it was. I think, and it's a personal conspiracy theory of my own, that was an actual test to see how the population would respond in the event of a cataclysmic alarm, because we are actually posturing war with these countries where they would be in danger.
Well, the ironic thing was that Bill and Hillary were there, though, and that's not for nothing, dude, because there's never conspiracies.
Wow.
Yeah, man, there's never conspiracies, dude. Yeah, they were there at the same time, both of them.
That is weird.
All I can say, man, is if there's two people that could bury the world's power structure, it's probably them. But you can't just kill them.
What do you mean bury? You mean if we took them out? Are you kidding me?
I'm talking about Hillary and Bill, if they talked, could take out the world's power structure.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. I mean, they probably know the full enchilada, yeah.
So yeah, but you can't just off them.
Well, you can, but I mean, why not?
Well, because then they probably have dead men's switches and shit, and information gets leaked. But not if there's like a global catastrophe.
Look,
Yeah.
look, the more preventable than that is the fact that we're about to lose the First Amendment entirely to a campaign that was initiated by Hillary Clinton's campaign, perhaps with help from the Trump campaign. We are looking at censorship on such a massive scale that we will not have transparency in government for a very long time if people don't wake up and look at the facts and what is going on around them. And I rarely say that. This is disturbing to me on a number of levels, and I really wish that I can join the public to be as concerned as I am. And
the question is, how do we bankrupt this corporate, like you said, corporatocracy masquerading as a government? Like how can we make companies like Amazon and Google go away?
You can't do anything like that until you expose them first, and that's the goal right
and
now.
then boycott them. Vote with people. God damn! I swear to God, if people would just take seriously the fact that if we stop buying their goddamn products, they'll lose control.
Yes, exactly, because BDS actually works, and that's why politicians in the U.S. were trying to make it legal. Absurdly, yes, that's exactly why. Boycott, more than anything, hands down across the scale, boycott actually works.
And then what about a movement where we actually make it to where not a single person votes in the 2020 election?
I have dreamed that for years. Not for the 2020, and they did. So there's no way. People are too entrenched in their idea that like pressing that button is going to make the difference.
Won't the voting machine
valve.
just vote for itself, though? I mean, do we really even need to push that button anymore?
Well, look, okay, this is a similar question. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Look, if we're saying that you can affect the corporatocracy by voting with your dollar, then if we vote out the particularly egregious people, why does that not at least make an effect?
Because you still have the system of governance in place.
You do have the system of governance.
It's still the same corrupt system of governance. You still have the same hand-to-hand dollars behind the back. I mean, it's the same thing.
I mean,
I'd argue a true outsider doesn't last very long either.
Yeah.
And you can look, how many one-term governors are there? There's tons.
Do you think Trump's an outsider, a true outsider, or do you think
no? But at the same time, he's not status quo. So.
Right.
If you thought that the world was shitty and getting shittier, well, now it's going to go on a different course. So now there's at least an opportunity. Whereas before, because people were in such a freaking lull that they wouldn't even see what was happening. At least now they're resisting.
Well, some people.
They're wearing hats and marching. At least they're getting off their ass for once.
At least 50% of the electorate is now solely focused on Trump and, of course, is avoiding every other major issue that went on through the 8 years of the Obama administration, which...
Dude, paratroop them all into Moscow.
It drives me fucking nuts. I pretty much had to get off of Facebook because I couldn't stand listening to my Democrat friends continue to bury their head in the sand throughout all of this. It's one of my great disappointments in life is seeing people I used to respect just literally bury their head in the sand. But it happens all the time in lots of different ways. What is it about? I don't know. It's strange to me. I guess it's because I feel like my ego has been shattered and reconstructed so many different times. I don't really have a sense of pride in certain things. I don't understand why people are so not willing to consider alternative perspectives. I just don't understand it. Why are people so emotionally married to their narrative?
Because it makes you feel good when you have zero power.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh boy. Well, this is a real treat. I mean, anytime we have Claire on the show, it's a real treat. But just this group in particular, I love talking with you guys about this stuff. No
It
matter.
sucks to be a realist in an era where you see so much potential that if we know there's technology they're suppressing, and we know there's cures to sickness that they're suppressing, and that we know they're causing wars for resources that aren't scarce just to affect a population control and a control grid. And yet we can't, in the one country where we have actual ability to mount a resistance, don't do anything here.
Yeah, I think Claire tapped out. She came in and bore her soul for us, and she clearly cares very, very deeply about First Amendment and
It's everything.
It's everything.
But it's backed up by the Second. They go hand in hand. I don't care what anybody out there thinks that's listening. If we lose the Second, you're not going to have the First. You're just not. Why would they? Why? Go to other countries around the world where they don't have the ability to have private firearms, and they are in a complete tyrannical situation every time. It doesn't matter where they're at.
So you think that the only reason we have the First Amendment still upheld right now is because people out there have assault rifles?
It's only because of the threat of the potential of that they can't come and do whatever they want anytime to all of us.
Right, but remember, there's no way the entire Second Amendment is going to be repealed.
They're working on it, though. It comes in.
No, they haven't achieved one. They haven't chipped one corner yet, dude.
They're chipping away at corners of it as we speak, though. There's legislation being talked about right now.
They're talking about the first chip, but throughout all the shootings of the last 20 years, not one gun control law has passed.
Yeah, and I think the real reason for that, Jake, is that they were never really worried about the people using it on them, and now they are.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And here's the reason why: because Trump is so polarizing. You had the greatest actor ever in the White House for the last 8 years before him. I mean, he was a guy that was the great deceiver because he
had good intentions coming in, but
he did. But even if he did, it was all an act.
Yeah,
and he did the opposite of what he said he did. Was he created even worse relations here in the country among people of different backgrounds, dude? The opposite of what he said he was going to do.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that, but I do agree. I think a lot of that is just, quite frankly, impoverished white people that are pissed off that a black person was president. I don't really think he made this charge that Obama was racist is absolute bullshit to me, but I don't want to get into that aspect of it.
Well, I don't know how he could be because he's multi. I mean, I guess he could be racist against like Asians or something.
Well, I mean, look, the point is clearly Obama became Bush's third term, and we all know that. And
every president since JFK has been the same cabal, so it doesn't, except Jimmy.
Jimmy
was like a speed bump.
Good old Jimmy.
But he didn't do anything, and he only lasted a term. And he looked, God, man, God bless him is all I can say.
He at least created a template for future presidents that could be like, I'm going to be a Jimmy.
Well, yeah, I mean, why would you not donate your time when you have that pension and secret service for life?
My question is, how did he live through those 4 years if he wasn't willing to play ball? I guess at that point, the deep state, they weren't really. It was between Vietnam and Iraq, so that he kind of hit a point where they were kind of like recalibrating shit,
Well, yeah, I mean, I honestly think like maybe after you get tapped out after a while for resources, for manpower, sometimes you need that one-term guy,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I don't think any of these people can really be good. Not really. I mean, they can be. They don't have to be evil to be president. There's been some guys that I've respected, in office, but none of them are good. You just can't when you have that kind of power. Who do I respect?
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite president's just Teddy, but that's because I've researched him a lot, and his life was an adventure, and he lived in a romantic period, and he did something called gunboat diplomacy, which I wish we'd practice, which is the threat of war, not war. not going in, not regime change, but saying, if you don't deal with us on favorable terms economically, we will fuck you up. But that's the thing, is he never needed to. He got the Panama Canal solidified. He did so many things without having to go to war. And when he actually went to war, which was against the Moorish Empire, the freaking pirates, it was for a real reason, not to take resources, but to stop piracy.
Who else? JFK?
Yeah, but I mean, you have to still look at him as a blue blood and a womanizer, and he was ethically and morally very, very imperfect. But yeah, I mean, he was a patriot.
When it comes to presidents, I'm not looking for ethics. I'm looking for ethics. I'm looking for a different set of ethics, not personal ethics. You know, I'm talking about.
He was good. I mean, he was a good person, I think, at heart.
Greater good.
Yeah, I think he was.
I mean, his speeches, some of those speeches where he's calling out the secret societies, I mean, that shit will live in perpetuity. I mean, people will be quoting those speeches for thousands of years. Not just hundreds of years, thousands of years.
You know who's the worst, though, is Lincoln.
Really?
Absolutely, dude.
Oh,
that amendment, it was never about freedom. It was about installing that Social Security number so they could attach a banknote to you. That's really what they rammed in with the Civil War.
Interesting. I haven't read much about that, but
yeah, it just made us all debt slaves. You know, it really did.
I mean, do you think it's possible that maybe he didn't realize what the ultimate ramifications of it would have been? Perhaps maybe it was.
Well, he was very intelligent, so I'm not. He was not George Bush.
He could have known hundreds of years in advance.
He knew. He knew he was capitulating to the bankers because
but that was before the Fed, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it created the Fed. The Civil War created the Fed, and the Civil War, if it had gone according to plan, which was Lincoln's plan, he was going to deport the entire African American community to Liberia, and then he got killed.
Well,
weird history, folks.
Yep. We are a part of history here. All right. Well, it's great to have Claire on. DB, as always, it's great to have you on. And all right, everyone, love each other. Yo, here we go through the stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo.